Hey guys, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you. Today we have something from Bestech and Vulpex knives. This is the Navi. You can see the maker's mark right there. Really interesting knife. And I have to say, right from the start, before I even get into saying anything about this, the design here is absolutely gorgeous. And Steve Kempa, who's the designer, says it's inspired by the Navi from Legends of Zelda. So I haven't played all of the Zelda games. I'm somewhat familiar with the Navi. I am working on whatever the current one is. My son got it, and so I've played it a little bit. Nonetheless, not a huge Zelda guy, but the end, whether you're a Zelda fan or not, this is a great looking knife. And I have to give the designer a lot of credit here. This is beautiful. It flows really well. The finishes that Bestech has done here are excellent. There's a little touch of copper. You'll see this little copper pin. Come on, focus you. Why? There we go. You'll see this copper. I guess my camera just hates me today. It does not want to cooperate at all. But that's a pretty common design element you'll see with a few of the knives from Vulpex knives. There are a bunch of other collaborations. So I have to say, I have not been that familiar with this particular designer, but in fact, and you may not be either, but there's quite a few of his knives out there. There's a Kaiser collaboration. There's another Bestech folder that's a little bit smaller than this one. There's a fixed blade from Bestech as well that I think is the most recent. I could be wrong. This might be the most recent. Anyway, nonetheless, there are a few other Vulpex designs out there. They tend to have a similar flavor. They're very, it's definitely a design you can pick out from a crowd, which is very welcome. And again, I have to reiterate this. I have a video coming up where I'm going to kind of talk about custom knives, but I do think custom collaborations are sort of the peak of knife enthusiast options out there, because you get a known quantity. There's control for quality and size, and a custom knife where someone's fully hand making this thing is wildly inefficient, where a factory produced knife, it's you still get the input from a custom designer who's carefully thought things through and put something together in a meaningful way, and yet you also get the reliability of a Wee knife or a Riyadh or a Bestech or whoever else may be making this thing, okay? So I love design collaborations, and this one is no exception. This is a beautiful work of art, but it's also a pretty effective cutting tool, and I can see this being your one and only EDC knife, depending on what your particular use needs happen to be. So let's go ahead and get into this just a little bit. So up front here, we have a very nicely stonewashed MagnaCut blade, and my camera still does not want to focus. There we go. Very nicely done MagnaCut blade with this very good fuller. And the fuller, I have to say, is perfectly executed so that when you go to deploy this knife with a Spidey flick, your finger really catches. Like, you don't have to give it any thought. You can just naturally get a hold of that and flick it out. So much authority. And we'll come back to this. We're not quite ready to talk about action yet, but I have to say, the action is superb on this knife. It is so satisfying. Before we get to that though, I do want to throw in size and weight. Okay, so the size on this, 8 inches overall. It's actually just a hair under 8 inches, 3 1/4 inches on the blade length. The cutting edge is actually a little more than that at 3 5/16. When you close it, what you're actually going to have to be dealing with in pocket is only 4 11/16, so not a difficult knife to carry at all. And the weight on this is only 4 ounces. So that's pretty good. The only size issue that I have with this is grip area. And this is a little bit of an unfair criticism, because if you measure from here to here, you only get like 3 inches, just a little over 3 inches. But in fact, because of the way the handle is, your hand pretty comfortably. Like, so you can see my pinky just kind of connects there and ends up kind of halfway resting on this angled part of the handle. So it's not bad at all. What I would have liked to see, and I feel like a broken record, but I want to say I think I'm more justified in this case than some of the other cases. What I'd like to see is just a little bit more handle here, and possibly if you made this knife a little bit bigger, I know you guys are all waiting for me to say that, you could make this into a finger choil, giving the option to choke up a little bit. And so I feel like, if Steve, you ever watch this video, or Bestech, and you want to make a larger version of this knife, I think a large version of this knife would work. But I think a larger version of every knife would work. So I just got to throw my biases out there. Okay, I'm well aware. Now, let me come back to the features and the materials here, because there are a number of notable things here. The blade up front with that, look at that stonewash. Bestech, I think, has really stepped up their stonewash. This is a great looking blade. All right, still looks crisp and clean. And that's one of the things, I tend to like satin blades better because you end up getting a more dramatic transition between your various grind angles. But this has done a pretty nice job of still showing off some of those details. So I do like it. Would I prefer it in a satin finish? Probably. That's pretty subjective. The stonewash that Bestech has done here is really, really nice. It gives a lot of depth, and that's what I look for in a stonewash. All right, where you're not just doing it to sort of finish the knife quickly and hide all the imperfections. You've actually taken some time and energy, and it adds something to the knife. And I really think this does add some depth and some character to this knife. Now, there are some other colorways, and I don't like all of them as much. This one I like quite a lot. All right, we have that copper pin. I've already mentioned it, but that's a pretty common feature on Volpek's knives. It's kind of one of his signature things. All right, moving down to the handle, we've got this triangle decorative pivot. On the other side, you can see it is a Torx driver to adjust that pivot or take the knife apart, or whatever the case may be. Obviously, we're looking at a titanium frame lock here. And again, I've got to make this design note. I love just how these lines nicely connect and kind of flow together really, really well. The titanium is also wearing this really, really nice stonewash. And again, I've got to comment. I've had lots of Bestech knives. I think they've really continued to step up their quality, their fit and finish. This is really, really nice. And again, this is a stonewash that looks absolutely great and is going to wear exceptionally well. Okay, moving back here, we've got titanium backspacer, and this is really, really cool. I'm not a lanyard guy at all, but if you're going to do a lanyard, this is a great way to do it. It kind of vanishes when you turn the knife to its show side, or obviously to the lock side. But when you take a close look, you can see that they have allowed for a lanyard there, which is really, really a great way of doing this. So it's integrated into the backspacer. It doesn't take away anything from the knife. It only adds. And that, I think, is what if you can pull off a way of adding a practical feature that your knife needs while not distracting from the overall design, I think that's perfect design. And they have really, really done that here. The knife has been milled out to save a little bit of weight. I'm trying to look around and see if I have a flashlight here, and I don't really have one. Oh, I guess I can do this. See if that works. And I'm not able to angle it in a way that is much use. So you're gonna have to take my word for it. This knife does have milling internally to save a little bit of weight, and that is how it gets down to that 4-ounce number. The pocket clip here is well integrated into the design. It goes in and out of pocket really nicely, and it's a milled clip. And I like milled clips. I know some well-known, one of my favorite knife YouTubers is the Apostle P. He doesn't do as much as he used to, but he always complained about milled titanium clips. And I always disagreed with him. I think if they're done right, they do add a bit of class to a folder, and they don't have to suck. And this one is pretty darn good, okay? and it looks great as well. Of course, it's screwed internally, which is a great feature. And so, yeah, this is a really nicely done clip. It's not deep carry, so if that's sort of a thing that you always insist on, this is not going to be the knife for you. But for most of us, it rides fairly deep. You can see, you know, your pants are going to be right around here. So fairly deep carry clip, but not, you know, a full bent over, you know, disappear into the pocket type of deal. This knife does have a bearing pivot, and the action on this is so dialed in. I have to say, I don't always love front flippers, but this is the most intuitive front flipper I have ever felt, to the point that it deploys like a regular flipper. Like it's really satisfying and really enjoyable to deploy. It is it's the best, the most dialed in front flipper I have ever felt. And that is not something that I, you know, admit to easily. The other thing is the Spidey flick on this, or even the slow thumb roll. Well, I can do it when I'm not on camera. There we go. The deployment on this is very well done. Now, the front flipper and the Spidey flick are my preferred methods, okay, and both work really well. If I haven't mentioned it yet, I want to talk a little bit about this blade. This is a MagnaCut blade, and we've talked about the finish already, but I didn't really talk about cutting performance. High flat grind here, nice fuller that we've already mentioned, and it's pretty darn thin behind the edge. Not the thinnest knife I've ever seen, but just let me give you an example. Okay, so here's my tube of testing, and you know, one of the ways that I test is how hard do I have to push to get this to cut pretty well, and I do not have to press hard. You can see I'm not getting a lot of deformation in that tube. Let me show you something with a thicker blade so you can sort of see how that does. There's the Microtech MSI, and it's a little, you can definitely tell that I'm moving more material through when I'm using the MSI. Okay, so cutting here is pretty darn good. The edge geometry is pretty nice, even with a full flat grind, and it's not the thinnest blade stock ever, and I do like that. Now, even though it's fairly thick blade stock, this is not a knife that you're going to want to be abusing in any way. It's pretty fine out here at the tip. Now, that's going to be great for utility cutting tasks, this kind of stuff. But just don't be throwing this thing around or dropping it on the concrete or anything like that. That's not probably going to bode all that well. The only real complaint I have about this knife, and it's really not a fair complaint, I guess there are a couple little ergonomic points that I would call complaints. The lock bar is pretty accessible. I should have mentioned that before. But the blade, because of the size of this knife, it's a little on the small side. It kind of forces my thumb up here onto the spine to be comfortable. And because of that top swedge, the spine is fairly thin here. So I would have liked to see them either go with less depth, right? So reduce that angle on that swedge so you could still get the visual effect without having quite so much cut in, because I'm definitely going to be putting pressure on that thumb when I'm cutting. It doesn't have to be a lot. Like, you can still do a lot with your hand. In a hammer grip, it's a little small. So a saber grip is going to be my go-to, and it needs a place for my thumb to land so that I can be a little more comfortable when cutting. That's really the only thing that I would do differently here, or the only thing that I would complain about. And that's a pretty minor complaint, to be honest. It's still comfortable enough. And you saw me cutting with it. It's fine in use. You know, I don't have any major complaints. I do want to throw in a few comparisons here before we wrap things up. And I've got a couple of knives that I think kind of fall into a similar category. The Jan Knives Chevron from Jan Knives, built by Riot. We've also got the Concept Convict here, which similar size, similar sort of use case, sort of a higher end EDC. Both of these are visiting from Steve, but since they work so well, I thought I'd throw them in the same video. To give you an example of how good the front flipper on this is, the Chevron is a front flipper, and I can do it, but I kind of have to think about it for a second every time. The Bestech, just, you don't even have to think about it. It just deploys. In terms of size comparison, here it is beside a Para 2. Another knife that this kind of, has a similar feeling to is the Freeman Knives Voodoo, built by Tuya. The Tuya is a little more hand-filling. I like the ergonomics on this a little bit more, but it's also going to be a little heavier, a little more, there's some significant differences here, but you can see there's sort of a similar flavor in that. In terms of Warren clips, I don't have a lot, but I do have the Yojimbo as well. This would be very similar to a Yojimbo, the original, and that's why I brought the Yojimbo out, just in case, if you want something that's a more familiar company, or whatever the case may be, if you're looking for similar knives, maybe that don't cost as much, that would be perhaps a good option. All right. So overall thoughts on the Bestech Navi. I think this is a gorgeous, gorgeous knife. I think Bestech's done a great job building it. The design, though, is absolutely stunning. This is such a gorgeous, gorgeous knife. And so on that level, this just connects with me so much. Every time I look at this, every time I get it out, I'm sorry, it's one of those knives where you take it out of your pocket and you look at how gorgeous it is, and then you go ahead and use it for whatever you were going to plan to cut with it. The other thing is, I find myself wanting to just fidget with this knife. It is so good. The action is absolutely the best. Again, I've got to finish by saying this is the best front flipping action I have ever felt. And I'm going to have to put that in the title. They have absolutely nailed that portion of this. And so other people out there, other designers, look at the geometry of this and copy this geometry, because this is what works so well. All right. The other thing I find is I naturally don't find myself putting my fingers on this lock bar, which is super helpful on a smaller knife like the Navi that we're talking about here. Thanks a lot for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We will talk to you soon.